You are listening to Arts on the Air, a bi-weekly-ish interview show dedicated to Savannah, Georgia's artists, musicians, and authors. Each episode will feature a guest in conversation about their philosophy, practice, and current projects, as well as their thoughts on the state of the arts in our community of Savannah. Our theme music is a clip of Summer Nights by the Eric Jones Trio. It's provided by our friend Mark Chesanow, who plays with the Eric Jones Trio. Hey everyone, welcome to Arts on the Air. This is Tamara Garvey, and I am excited to have film producer Andrew Meyer here today with us. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. Now, is it Meyer? Mayer? Did I get
Meyer.
That? Meyer. Okay, great.
Everybody mixes it up though, so it's
Meyer. Okay, I got it. Let me read a little bit from your bio on your website. So, Andrew has served as an entertainment industry executive, film producer, and educator. And among the many films he's produced are Fried Green Tomatoes, The Breakfast Club, Bring on the Night, Birdy, and the cult classic Better Off Dead. I will say I did go see Better Off Dead when we showed it downtown at the theater a couple of years ago. That was really exciting.
At the Trustees.
Yes, and it was like 38 years old at that point, is that right?
When I hosted the show.
Yes.
And I brought the cast back and everything. You were there?
It was so fun, yeah.
Oh, cool.
I had seen that movie years ago, and yeah, it was very random to see it brought back. And I read a little bit in a previous interview you did that you woke up one day and it suddenly was trending everywhere. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, it had been in distribution only as a DVD for 35 years because the company that made it went out of business as soon as we produced the movie. And it wasn't until January of 2003 that I happened to look at the Apple Plus chart, and out of nowhere, Better Off Dead was numbered like 7. And then Netflix picked it up again, Amazon picked it up again, Hulu picked it up again, and it was a hit all over like almost 40 years later, which is sort of the story of my movies.
That was
they tend to stick around.
That was 2003 you said that happened?
Yeah.
Did you ever find out?
No, 2023.
2023. Did you ever find out what was it that suddenly did that?
No, they tell me it's just the algorithms of the sale and people sort of talking about the movie. You know, movies come back. I made a movie called Birdy with Nicolas Cage that won the Grand Jury Prize at the Cannes Film Festival, and now it's on Netflix and it's kind of a hit again. So the thing about content is it never really goes away.
Yeah.
You know, it can always come back, and it's not like an event that happens once, and if you're not there, you can see my movies anytime, anywhere, and that's sort of, so from generation to generation, people are coming up and telling me they like my movies, which is nice.
And I think a thing specifically when you mentioned generations is that, you know, the coming up, the Generation Z, they're like very into 80s and 90s pop culture and cult classics, and maybe John Cusack had a thing and he became trending and people wanted to go back and look at his earlier things, and this one came up. It's cool. Can we, just to start with, just to like define our terms, because I feel like this is a very mysterious aspect of movie making. Can you define what is a movie producer?
Well, that's a good question, and you can sort of have different producers. The short version is what I do, and I'm not a line producer per se. In other words, I'm not on set all day physically producing the movie. I'm what's called an executive producer. So I'm there in the beginning with an idea or a writer or some money or something to get things going. And then I develop the script, and then I bring on directors and actors, and then I get the financing, and then I supervise production, and then I do post-production, and then I do distribution and marketing. So I'm the only one who's there from the beginning all the way to the end. So a physical producer, a line producer, may just be there for the production.
Okay.
So that's kind of the difference between producing.
Yeah, you were there for almost the entire thing except for being on set during the actual filming of the movie.
Well, no, I'll come in and, I'll go to it, but I'm not there 12 hours
That's not
a day.
Your job.
I hire a producer.
Yeah.
And then there's line producers and production managers and associate. It gets kind of complicated.
It sounded like, so when it starts off, it could be through a few different channels. It could be that like you come across the director or the writer who has an idea, or just the idea comes to you and then you have to find the writer. Is that true? It's a lot of different avenues.
That's absolutely correct. And, I tell my students, I probably shouldn't tell them this, but if you want to be a producer, just option a book. If you own the rights, then you are by definition a producer because they can't make the movie without you.
Oh.
So acquiring the rights is one way of becoming a producer, and having an idea is another way of becoming a producer, or raising a lot of money or having money.
Yeah.
That kind of helps.
So the optioning of a book, so you read a book and you love it and you have a dream for it years from now. How does one option a book?
You contact the author or you contact the publisher and or the agent, and they all have somebody who's in charge of letting you know if the rights are available. And then you can option it for a year or 2 years, and then you control it. And then if you want to make the movie, you have to buy the book. So you've already agreed on a purchase price.
Oh.
Sort of like a painting, you know.
So either way, you need money up front.
Money's good.
You need the money, okay.
Money would help.
So the optioning is like calling dibs on this story.
Yeah.
Okay. And you tell this to the students?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about this later, that you have been a SCAD professor for 20 years now as of this year, which is cool. I wanted to talk a little bit about, so you graduated from Bucknell University in Pennsylvania. What were you imagining you were going to do when you were in school?
Well, I was an English major.
Okay.
And I had already decided I wasn't going to be a lawyer because it was too much work, and I wasn't going to be a doctor because I fainted at the sight of blood. So I knew I liked to read, so I said I'll be an English major, and it was kind of the best decision I ever made. But I got involved in producing concerts, first in high school to raise money for the scholarship fund. And then in college, I didn't like the program they had, so I created my own and produced bands like the Grateful Dead and the Band and Donovan and Judy Collins. And that sort of put me in the entertainment business because I was dealing with all these people, Sly and the Family Stone, Richie Havens. And from that, I decided, because I was really busy producing concerts, too busy to take an economics class.
Yeah.
I went to my...
So in college, you're responsible for bringing the bands into play.
And producing all the concerts. So that I created what's called the Bucknell Concert Committee, which was me. And it's still there at Bucknell. 50 years later, I remember I reconnected with them, and I was like a ghost to them. They said, wait, you're the guy who started, 50 years?
Is
really?
your name buried in little, random signs and papers deep down?
Yeah, there's still some posters from those concerts and everything.
So this sounds like what you're doing. This would supersede all of your college classes. This sounds like it really snowballed into a huge job.
And I was so busy, I went to a professor and said, I really like your class, but I don't have time for it. And he said, well, you're running a business, producing the college concerts. Why don't you write a paper, and that'll be your independent study.
Okay.
And that paper turned into a book that I sold to Billboard called Dancing on the Seats, which is connected me to A&M Records, and that's what got me into the record business first.
So that book was about your experience of producing these concerts.
It was a guide, because it occurred to me that once I graduated, because I created all these rules for concerts, that no one would once you're gone, you take your knowledge with you. So I wrote a book for the incoming freshmen, so they would know how to produce these concerts, because I wasn't going to be there anymore. And that book then got in the hands of A&M Records, and they hired me to run their college department.
That's amazing, because you basically were just documenting your job as you left your job for the incoming.
Well, but it was I had created a whole system, which was unique, very similar to what. There was a guy named Bill Graham who was a promoter for the Fillmore East, famous New York club, and he had a system where he booked bands for the whole season and got them cheaper, and there was a whole way of doing it, and I kind of mirrored that at this little school of only 5,000 people in the middle of nowhere. To
be even able to get these bands' attention and get them to come out of their way of wherever they're traveling to play there.
Yeah, it was kind of... I used to book the bands on Thursday, then they go to New York on Saturday and Sunday. So I get them on the off days for a cheaper price. And so I sort of wrote about that whole season ticket concept, and that became the book. And
is that book out there where people can get it? Okay.
It's on Amazon.
All right, so if somebody is interested in music production, that's... So
it's a little dated, but
the word internet doesn't appear anywhere in there.
No. We had electricity, but that's
Yeah,
about it.
you had to make an actual phone call. Intimidating.
Well, in those days, it's interesting you say that because the way I got the hold of the first band in high school was on the album. There were albums.
Yeah.
The manager and his phone number was on it.
Wow.
So I just called him up.
Imagine that being public like that.
and that sort of, everybody was connected in it. It was easier and harder in a way because people you actually knew their phone numbers and otherwise, and you went to a payphone to contact somebody.
Yeah, maybe you had to keep putting in coins.
Used to carry a bag of coins around, and then the phone would get jammed, and then
How do you have the chutzpah in high school to pick up a phone and call a manager of a band? How does that even occur to you?
I was upset. Probably the turning point in my life, and there's a documentary about me called the same as the book, Walking in the Fast Lane. The high school handed out a piece of paper to everybody asking us to donate $100 to the scholarship fund, and my family was broke, and we didn't have $100 for me, and it was a general fund, and I didn't know where my money was going.
I mean, that's a large amount of money to ask for now, but back then especially.
Yeah, and it really annoyed me, and I went to the principal and I said, "You guys, you're doing this the wrong way. You ought to give something back to the students." And I said, "Why don't we do a concert, and then we'll make much more money than this stupid letter and $100." And he said, "Okay, see what you can do." And so I called up this. It was my favorite band, and they were big in New York. They were called the Blues Project, and they're still pretty popular. And I found a hall, the Westchester County Center. I drove around, I found it. I went back to the Board of Education and said, "Here's the band, here's where we're going to do it. You're going to make a ton of money." And they said, "Okay." And I'd never produced anything. I was an English major.
Yeah, and so then you basically relieved all the other students' families in school from having to pay this $100.
Well, school made a ton of money from it, much more than they would have made from these little donations.
I mean, the whole basis of it, it's absurd that a school even has to be out begging and hunting and for money anyway,
Well, to my students who are doing documentaries, I always say to them, at the end of your documentary, give people a chance to do something. Because if you're showing a really depressing documentary and then people walk away and go, "Oh, that's terrible."
Yes.
But you say give them an action. So if you want to help, contact this group or this website.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then they feel like they're engaged.
Yeah, you just ginned up a whole bunch of energy and emotion in someone. They need to divert it somewhere.
Yeah. So that was the same way I did with the concerts.
That's an amazing story. In high school, I was busy running cross country and worrying about that my skin was super bad. So that's incredible that you were able to do that. We had very different brains in high school. I'm curious. I saw in your bio that you kind of first were in the music business, the music production, which you said stemmed from this book you wrote as you were graduating college, and you ended up at, what is it? The production company? It's the Herb Alpert.
A&M Records,
Right,
Alpert and Moss, Herb Alpert,
Oh, yeah.
Tijuana Brass.
So you ended up in California?
In Hollywood.
In Hollywood. Okay, so exciting. You moved from Pennsylvania to Hollywood, and you're working as a lower level producer for.
No, I was head of the college department, and I had college reps in every state, and my job was to get them to promote the bands at the colleges in each state. And where I worked was in Hollywood. It's the old Charlie Chaplin Studios where he made a lot of his movies, and so and it was all kind of cabanas and very Hollywoodish, and a recording studio, and
golden age of Hollywood.
Yeah, and I was there for "We Are the World," that famous song. I was there for the filming of it, and I sort of have a lot of stories with big rock stars, and those were my rock and roll years.
How long was that an all-day filming? How long did that song take?
It was all day, one day.
Okay.
And everybody came in.
And is that still the highest selling single of all time?
It is.
Okay. I read a funny story that you wrote somewhere where when you did start sitting in on the production meetings where the higher producers were trying to figure out the A side and the B side of a record, And kids, there used to be records that were physical things that had two sides to them. So there was like an alpha song and then kind of a backup song that you would just get when you bought the real single you wanted, and that apparently they would ask your opinion, and whatever you decided should have been the alpha song, they would always go with the opposite.
I had the worst taste of anybody in the company, and they could depend on me to pick the wrong record.
Yeah.
So if I liked a song, it became what's
funny.
called the B-side. And the A-side is released as a single, then the B-side, and they used to be 45 records, which nobody knows.
It's a smaller record.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With a hole in it.
Yeah. And the B-side is just the other song that you get along for the ride.
Because they had to do something with the other side of the record.
Would that be another, not as great single, or would it just be a completely random song?
Well, it would be another song on the album,
yeah,
but not the one that they want to promote
as
as a single.
Are there any notable ones that you remember choosing, rightly or wrongly? Because that's very funny that they would call you in to ask your opinion and then be like, go the other
Well,
way.
I can tell you that the Police wanted to release Roxanne as a single, and everybody in the record company thought it was a terrible idea, thought it would never be a hit. And then Jerry Moss, the man who's the M on A&M, insisted that it be a single, and he was right and everybody else was wrong.
Yeah.
So nobody knows anything.
He's the only one who saw that.
But he was a famous guy for finding bands, and he was sort of the tastemaker.
That's cool. I feel like that's a cool story about that song in particular, because it is sort of an unusual paced song. It doesn't seem like it would be really typical for what was coming out.
Yeah, nobody thought it was a single. They thought it was a good song.
It's a cool song. It's unusual.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really funny. How long were you there at A&M Records doing that?
I was there from 1971, through 1976, and then I announced, because I was turning 26, and I'd always said to myself that by my 26th birthday I wanted to take a year off and travel around the world, because I didn't want to wait till I was, then I said in my 60s, which is kind of ironic right now.
Yeah, that was the scary year that you had in mind.
And so I announced to them that I was taking a sabbatical without knowing there are no sabbaticals in the business. And I said I'm going around the world for a year, and they thought it was such a cool idea. They bought me an around-the-world ticket, which would be good for 6 continents for a year. And the cost of that, you could fly anywhere, was $2,500.
Wow, incredible. That's like one flight to a different continent
to China.
now. Yeah.
And so I traveled for a year and went all over the world and had all these adventures. And then I got a telegram in Israel from Jerry Moss saying...
A telegram?
A telegram saying, "You've had enough fun, come on back, I need you." And so I went back to become his assistant. My office was next to him. On the way back, I came up with this idea, because when I was traveling all around the world, I would walk into all kinds of stores, and there was music playing, and it was from a lot of films. And because A&M Records was a private record company, they didn't have a film division. So Warner Brothers had Warner Brothers Records and Warner Brothers Films. So if you're a Warner Brothers film, you give the soundtrack to Warner Brothers Records. So I said to A&M, you guys ought to be in the film business, because otherwise we'll never get soundtracks.
Like most other companies were going that way.
Yeah, and soundtracks were huge then. It was Saturday Night Fever and Dirty Dancing, and it was all really big soundtracks. And so they said, that's a good idea. And they said, why don't you run it? And I said, okay, but I didn't know anything about movies.
Yeah.
I didn't know budgets. I didn't know script. I'd never seen a screenplay before.
Right. You wouldn't have any contacts in the industry. You're not working in that industry.
No, I'd gone to a movie theater, So I said, yeah, I'll run it for you.
Wow.
So I started A&M Films.
And you're like 27-ish then?
Yeah. And I had an assistant, and I hired some people to read scripts for me who were smarter than me at the time.
And anybody coming to you guys, approaching you for scripts, was sort of taking a chance because you're this brand new company.
Right. And so that's when I sort of started my career as a movie producer.
Wow, that's wild. You kind of invented your own way through.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of my book is kind of about not following traditional pathways.
Yeah, one question I was going to have in general is if there is a traditional way to get through to be a movie producer, or if it, for most people, if it relies on just having a lot of money and kind of growing up in that world, like nowadays, what would you recommend to students?
Well, I mean, as you know, we've already talked about, optioning a book is a really good idea.
Yeah.
And if you get a book that's out of print, you can get it for free.
Okay.
Well, that's not true. If it's in the public domain, you can develop it and you don't need the rights.
If it's a certain number of years old.
Yeah, I think it's like 60 or 70 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's the same thing I've looked this up for using quotes or lines of poetry in my artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if something is a certain amount of years old, then it's just free for you to kind of use. Is there also a way, can you get a job like at the very bottom in a production company as like a production assistant where you're just running around? Is there a way that you work your way up over the years and you become a producer?
Well, it's not like working in a widget factory where if you're there for a certain number of years, they give you a promotion.
Yeah.
You kind of have to have an idea. I mean, it's very hard to be a producer without good ideas. I mean, there are line producers who, just know budgeting and scheduling.
Yeah.
That's sort of not my jam.
Yeah.
But there's software that if you learn it creates more value. It's called Movie Magic. It's complicated, it's budgeting. We teach it here at SCAD. And if you on your resume say I can budget with Movie Magic, that may get you in the door. Okay. Because there aren't a lot of people who know how to do that. But it's better to have ideas. I mean, in life, it's better to have ideas. I think, generally.
It's really amazing to hear. I love that it just started from, even in high school, you had a problem with something, you went to them and kind of protested. And it seems like you have this thing that keeps happening in your life where you go to somebody higher up and you're like, I have this idea. And they're like, okay. And they dump it back on you and you're responsible for doing it. And it seems like each time you were able to actually do it, which is incredible. Because they're getting progressively bigger, the stakes of each thing that they're like kind of dumping back on you to take control of.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're right. It did start out with smaller challenges that became bigger challenges. Right. And of course, producing all the movies was kind of the biggest challenge.
When you when you at A&M, when you kind of created the movie aspect of A&M and then went in that direction, were you still doing music as well, or did you just totally shift to movies?
I was running a separate film company called A&M Films.
Did you miss working with rock stars and things like that?
Well, I was still on the lot, and I was still working, because we were doing soundtracks and everything, so yeah. I hadn't left the Charlie Chaplin studios, so I was still in that world, but I was doing films and meeting with writers and directors, and that sort of the series of movies that I made came out of that.
Do you like the aspect of working with the writers and like having a hand in helping them develop it a certain way, or do you like to just give somebody free rein to go where they want to go?
No, I'm very hands-on in development, and I teach writing here, and it's sort of what I think I do best.
Since you started with an English degree, so you like that aspect?
Well, yeah, I mean, the English degree helped, but I'm just naturally, when I'm teaching writing, if I can spend 2.5 hours in the world of ideas, I'm happy. Yeah. That's what I kind of like.
How do you so as the movie's going along and you're in the middle and you get back it's called dailies, right? Where you're seeing what they're filming. If something is going in a weird direction, how hard is it to kind of change the direction of the ship and alter things?
Well, the thing about watching dailies or making a movie is it's really hard to tell if it's any good or not when you're sort of in the bubble, when you're just looking at dailies. I've worked on movies where the dailies were terrible and we were frantic and it all cut together and they were big hit movies. Really? And I've worked on movies where everybody loved each other and the dailies looked great and the movies were terrible. So you never know. The person who knows first is usually the editor who's really looking at everything. You're just seeing snippets every day. Yeah. And you're sort of lost in the micro part of filmmaking as opposed to the macro, which is when you look at a rough cut. And then you know whether you have something.
Yeah.
And then you can reshoot or not.
So at that point, is it that the editor, like, it's whether the editor is good enough to make something good, or does it then just come down to that maybe the script as a whole, like, it just didn't ring a bell with audiences, that kind of thing?
Well, the movie shouldn't get made if the script isn't working for the audience, or for your opinion that it should work for the audience. It's in production where it can get really kind of messed up.
Okay.
I mean, there are so many ways a movie could fall apart. I'm always amazed the movie gets
Really?
made.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, actors can fall out, or the schedule gets messed up, or there's weather, or there's just a million ways that a movie can be in trouble.
Which was which kind of like world of people were more dramatic and wild to work with? Is it actors or is it musicians?
Well, I don't work with musicians as much. It's mostly actors.
Like, but back in your remembrances from your early life,
Well,
it was more outlandish, like, people to work with.
There's a story I tell about Joe Cocker having a premiere at the Roxy Theater, and he did a rehearsal that was the best performance I'd ever heard him do, because there's only like 4 people in the room. And then I left him to go to the Roxy, and when I came back, he was so drunk he could barely stand, and he tried to throw an amp out of the window, and I had to sort of carry him over to the Roxy to do his performance. It was the debut of his album, and it was a disaster. Everybody,
wow.
But I had seen his greatest performance. That's one reason why I wrote the book, actually, because I'm not zelling, but I've been in places where I'm the only one there, and if I don't tell the story, no one will hear the story.
Yeah.
So, to defend Joe Cocker, I heard him do a great performance. Yeah. Even though it didn't help him at the Roxy.
Has this performance trailed him around for a long time because it was such a big venue?
Well, the Roxy was a club, but all the press was there. It was sort of like a trustees theater kind of thing.
I like that. So, one goal of this book has just been, you've been working your whole life to rehabilitate Joe Cocker's rep from this one show at the Roxy.
I devoted my career to Joe Cocker.
You're like, I promise he could perform that album very well.
And then I tell that story to my students, and they don't know who Joe Cocker is. So
there you go. Right. But they're into the 80s and 90s, so maybe they'll work their way back and they'll get into the 70s things. Yeah. Can we talk a little bit? So I guess Fried Green Tomatoes is maybe one of the most iconic movies, and it was nominated for 2 Oscars, right? Mm-hmm. So you got to go to the Academy Awards.
I did. Yeah. And I went in Cannes, the movie I made, Birdy, starring Nick Cage, won the Grand Jury Prize. So, in Cannes, they treat the artists extremely well. You arrive with the producer and the director, and Nick Cage was the star of that movie. He's been in a million movies since.
And Matthew Modine is the other
and Matthew
star.
Modine. And when you walk in, they dim the lights and they put a spotlight on you, and everybody sort of stands until you sit down, and then they honor you and clap. And that doesn't really happen at the Golden Globes or the Oscars.
Right.
So it's a very respectful, once-in-a-lifetime kind of
that sounds like getting married, and then when you enter the hall, being introduced as a new married couple. Yeah.
And then, we won that prize. And that script was the first script I ever developed. Oh. And so I was kind of like, man, I must be doing something right.
It's really special,
It's the first script. I bought the book. Nobody wanted the book. Huh. It was a very seemingly non-commercial book. It's about 2 boys who come out of Vietnam terribly traumatized. One who thinks he's a bird, acting like a bird in a sanatorium. That's why it's called Birdy. And he has an obsession with a bird called Perta. So nobody in Hollywood wanted it, but I thought it was an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And I developed it with some new writers, and it was a director named Alan Parker liked it, who's done all kinds of famous movies, Midnight Express and The Commitments and Evita. And he sort of came on board, and we made the movie, and it was a big critical success. It did very well.
Yeah. Yeah, and artistic success. What year was that you were first looking at developing that?
So when I opened A&M Films, in the next 5 years, I made like Breakfast Club, Better Off Dead, and Birdy. And that was a lot in 3 years. And they all were different, but they're all around today, so they must be
timeless.
Good. But, you know, the first thing I did when I opened the doors and we announced A&M Films is I called all the agents up and I said, what do you have for me to read? We need some scripts. I hired a couple one woman from publishing named Sarah Black and a gentleman from Newsweek named Dewey Graham, and they were just smart and sharp people. And I called one agent and he sent me National Lampoon's Vacation. And I read it and I said, this guy's really funny. And I called the agent and I said, that script had just been bought by Warner Brothers, but the movie hadn't been made. So the agent said, well, we don't really know him. He lives in Chicago. His name is John Hughes. We just signed him, and I was in his house the next day. And I said, that's a really funny script. Do you have anything else? And he said, I do, but there's a problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, I have to direct it. Now, I had done my research on John, just like you've done your research on me. He had worked for the National Lampoon, written some articles, maybe worked on a commercial. Now he's telling me he has to direct, you know, which was another example of chutzpah. And I said, well, let me read the script. And he said, I wrote it to take place in one room. I thought if it took place in one room, you might let me direct it. And I said, okay.
Oh, because it's not a huge risk, like artistically and production.
Right, that was his thinking. So
okay. Yeah, I can see that.
He was thinking ahead. And so I read the script, and it was The Breakfast Club, and I thought it was fabulous. And I called up my bosses, Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss, and I said, we have to buy this script right now, because if whoever reads it next will buy it.
Yeah. He'd already sold one. It's amazing, yeah.
Yeah, he had sold National Lampoon's Vacation. And they said, okay, how much money do you need? And I didn't know. I had just started the job, and I said $1 million. I said to me that sounded like an independent
It's a
movie.
nice number.
I said we have to, you know, I thought movies were made for like $1 million was an independent movie.
Did you know how much he had sold National Lampoon for? Is that
I didn't know anything. I didn't
so
know.
you just like completely free guessing?
I didn't do any research. I didn't even ask anybody. I just said, let's make the movie for $1 million and let's commit to him directing. And they said, okay. So now, and this is, I think, the funniest scene in my book, because it's true. Now, I'm 26, 27. John Hughes is about the same age. We sit in the room. Me, who knows nothing about producing or financing, tells John Hughes, who's never directed anything, I'm gonna give you $1 million and commit to you directing. And we're just two guys.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's really how The Breakfast Club started. It was going to be a little independent film.
So you offering him $1 million, was that a huge amount of money for him to get? Like, was that a huge guess?
It was $1 million to make the movie, and then he had a writing and directing deal.
Okay.
So it's $1 million independent movie.
So at the time, that would have been like the budget of kind of an indie movie.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay.
I mean, even now, that's a number that...
It's funny to think of these two 26-year-olds who are pretty novices talking about, I mean, it sounds like an outlandishly high figure. Like you arriving there being like, yeah, I've got $1 million to give you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it worked out. So what happened was we started casting in Chicago, this little movie, and I got a call from Universal Studios saying, we know you're making The Breakfast Club for $1 million, but we'll give you 12 for the movie. And my math wasn't that good because I was an English major, but I said 12 or 1 or... So we took 12 and we partnered with Universal.
So they're not like taking it from you.
No, I'm the executive producer, John's writing, directing. Our company produces the movie.
So what did they get out of it if they're throwing in all this extra money?
Well, what they wanted to do was the reason why they wanted to spend $12 million was they wanted to build the library from scratch.
Okay.
Because when you're watching a movie for 2 hours, if it's just in a library, this one's probably a little different than others.
You have to say we're doing this interview in the SCAD library, which is funny.
Yeah. Usually libraries look really dull. And the advantage of building your own set is if you already have the script, you know that Judd Nelson's got to fall through the roof. You know that Allie and Molly have to dance on the balcony. So you can design all that into the construction. And usually when you're making the movie, it's the other way around, in that you see a location, then you have to change the script. We had the script, and we could design the location exactly the way we wanted.
So it's a lot to. It's they're building a huge thing, but it still is just one building. It's not all this outside. So weather isn't an aspect 'cause you're not outside at all.
Right, and everybody went to work, 9 to 5.
Yeah.
And they did a very smart thing. They had all the actors, Molly and Judd and everybody, stay together in a hotel for a few weeks before pre-production. So by the time they came to the set, it was like they had been in school together.
Yeah.
And Molly was really young. She was under 18. She needed a tutor and all that. So they really had formed a kind of high school clique or non-clique.
Yeah.
And the movie was the easiest movie I ever made.
So just to make sure I understand, so Universal, they hear that you're making this movie and they make this offer because they imagine that this could actually be a huge hit and they could make tons of money. They see the potential to make a ton of money. So that's why they do this in the first place?
Yes.
Okay. Had National Lampoon already came out and so people were seeing that John Hughes was really good?
I forget the timing of that, except I know because he had sold that script.
Yeah.
But also they read the script. And anybody who reads that, the script that I read was pretty much the shooting script.
That was cool. I mean, that was this era where there were, John Hughes had this hit after hit, and it was all these high school movies where high school students, that age of kid, was taken really seriously, And
but the thing he did, which was really smart, and I tell this to my students, he gave me The Breakfast Club, and I bought it. But if I hadn't bought it, he had showed me, he had presentations for Pretty in Pink, Ferris Bueller's Days Off, 16 Candles. He was going to sell me something.
Yeah.
And, even in your business, in illustration, you have to walk into a room with more than one thing to sell. Because if they say no, the meeting's over. But if you have 4 or 5 things, it's a conversation that can weave into something interesting.
Yes.
And he had everything prepared for me, and he was going to sell me something.
He's an expert, yeah.
And so that's, it's a good lesson.
That's cool to learn about him, too.
Yeah. Or in life, to be, you can't just count on one thing to happen and then you have nothing.
I was a little curious, we kind of started in this direction because we were talking about Birdy a little bit, and you mentioned that at the time, you had read the story and you really had a vision for it, but most people were not thinking of it. Was this, if it was in the early 80s, do you think it was just pretty close to the Vietnam War era and people just, it was too depressing, people didn't want to delve into something that sad about it?
No, actually the book was World War II, and we updated it to Vietnam so young people could relate to it.
Okay.
The idea of his obsession with the bird was a big problem for Hollywood. I mean, I've always had, fried green tomatoes was very difficult to sell because of the relationship between Mary Louise Parker and Mary.
I'm trying to think of her name too. Where they have this unspoken lesbian relationship.
Yeah, and the studios were afraid of that, and so that took us a long time to get made.
Yeah.
A lot of the movies I made were movies other people had passed on. I just sort of had an instinct.
I'm curious, this aspect, especially in Birdy, where I think it's really fascinating how sometimes there's a book and then a movie comes out and people always love to say, oh yeah, the movie's okay. It's, either they say it's not as good as the book or it's so different from the book. And I always think, in general, it's going to have to be really different from the book because it's a completely different medium. You're not just reading, but it's visual, there's sound, there's music, there's everything to it. So it almost seems like a rarer case to make a movie that is going to be right alongside the book. And it seems like more of an artistic achievement and like somebody's done more and put their hands in it more if the movie is really, really different. And it's like they've worked harder to really think about it and really translate it into a whole new medium. I always think that's very interesting. But I think it's funny that a lot of times when people talk about it, they mention it as like a negative if the movie deviates from the book.
That's why authors are not good people to adapt their own work.
Okay.
And you rarely see that because they can't understand the difference between the medium they created the product in, which is the book, and the movie that you go to the theater. It's two entirely, you're right, it's two entirely different mediums. And so you keep the author as far away.
It's so funny, yeah.
I teach an adaptation class at SCAD every spring. And, you know, most of the time, the best adaptations are without the author involved at all.
Yeah.
And, you know, and they have to just trust you. The way most of my movies were adapted from books.
Yeah.
And so they have to, whoever they give the rights to, they have to really trust them. Because you're basically taking their baby and turning it into something else.
Yeah,
so
and they have to trust the person writing the screenplay, and then all of the people involved with all the visual aspects as well. That's a lot.
Yeah, so I had to meet with all the authors and get their trust, and then they gave me the rights.
So yeah, do you think so? For people to be really good at writing screenplays, that's interesting because they have to like have this background of just being good at language and writing and authorship, but also to have an eye for what's going to translate well visually. Mm-hmm. That it's like a real hybrid kind of writer.
There's two different kinds of writers, and they're both equally important. I teach the adaptation class because there are some people who don't have their own ideas, but are great at adapting somebody's work, and that's a career. Yeah. You know, there are a lot of screenwriters who make a ton of money, and they're known just for adaptations. Right? And I would have two lists on my desk, original writers and adaptations. So if you're not an original writer, don't like say, I'm finished, go find a book and maybe you're better at editing and adapting.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and so, you know, that's why I created that class for SCAD because nobody was teaching adaptation.
Oh, specifically adaptation? Yeah. That's really interesting.
You can take it.
Yeah.
You can come audit it.
Could I? I would love to.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. I have you on the record.
Now I'm in trouble because I don't think I'm supposed to say that.
Well, you snuck me into this library, so thank you. That sounds fabulous. Yeah, the other thing I was thinking that, you touched on this. I think maybe you haven't like produced any Stephen King books, but just as we're talking about the screenplay, I always think he's such a fascinating case of like, you know, that he has so much source material, decades and decades, and some of his movies are incredible and some of them are horrible and some are in the middle. So it seems like such a cool case study to look at him as the whole field of just, I guess, how difficult it is to adapt certain novels into movies.
Well, he makes it easier because he has a website where he gives you short stories that you can adapt for free.
Really?
So, you know.
It's just like a public service?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's written a bunch of short stories. They're on a website. I can send you the link and I give it to my students. And if you can't come up with your own idea and you want to try a screenplay, you can adapt one of his short stories and then the story's there and then you just need to work on the action and dialogue.
What, and then you approach him and you say, I have this adapted?
No, it's just if you want to learn screenwriting.
Wow.
Or if you want to make something, you can take one of his short stories.
This makes me love him even more.
No, it's very cool.
What a character.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Okay. Wow, this is really fascinating. Can we talk a little bit about, so Better Off Dead then came out, and it's funny because I guess this is kind of the same era, like we said, that John Hughes was making all these very like serious movies about high school students, and Better Off Dead is just so ridiculous and absurdist. And do you want to talk a little bit about how this one came out?
Yeah, I received a VHS. Now everybody has to Google what VHS is. And it was on my desk. And what was unique about that was I was working, as I said, at Charlie Chaplin Studios where there were security guards and I had people around me. And somehow this tape appeared on my desk. And I looked at it and it was a black and white film, short film called My 11-Year-Old Birthday Party. I thought it was the funniest film I'd ever seen. And I found the guy who made it. I've known him for almost 50 years. He's never told me how he snuck that tape onto my desk. And his name was Savage Steve Holland, which is his
cool name
today. And he was an animation major at Cal Arts. And he wanted to make a narrative feature. And he told me about Better Off Dead, and he was writing the script, and I liked it, and I liked him. You know, a lot of times if I just believe in somebody, then the work comes along. It's not always, I'm not a formula stats guy. And it took me 3 years to find somebody to finance a first-time filmmaker who was an animation major who'd only made one short. And we finally, he and I spent 3 years going from New York, because I really believed in the script. But it was kind of out there.
In the script, was it already noted that there were little blips of animation in it? Okay.
Yeah, he had some animation, but it was a live action. So finally, we found a company in New York, CBS Films, who would give us $3 million, which is nothing. It's a television budget. And we shot it out. And then, as I was saying in the beginning of the interview, that company went out of business as soon as we finished the film, and it wasn't, I mean, I don't think it's my fault.
You guys managed to kill this company.
But the baby lived. And so, you know, that became and when the movie was out in the theaters, it didn't do very well, and then it disappeared. But then people would just, like they do now, just pass it along and have favorite phrases. And
was John Cusack already kind of a star at that point? Like, had Say Anything come out?
No, he had made one movie before that.
Okay.
He was in Stand By Me, which is a movie.
Yes.
With Carl Reiner, and he was just kind of emerging.
Okay.
But you know, I have in writing this book, I sort of came to the realization that I've been doing the same thing all my life without thinking about it, which is mentoring people. So most of my early movies were with first-time directors, which is mentoring. Although I wouldn't call it that, I was producing. But then I transitioned from mentoring first-time directors to students. So it seems to be a trend in my life that I'm kind of proud of, actually. And, you know, Savage had never directed a movie. John Hughes did 16 Candles first, because that was a business decision. And then he did and then John Abnett had never directed a feature, and he directed Fried Green Tomatoes. And another very good director, Michael Hoffman, who made The Last Station and Soap Dish and On. I made his first movie, was called Breaking In, when I was running Robert Redford's company. Mm-hmm. So that sort of was my thing. Difficult to get made, ideas, and first-time directors. I have no idea why I chose that path.
Always go the harder route.
But, you know, it sort of paid off for a while.
You mentioned working at Robert Redford's production company. Was that like kind of the quote unquote fanciest, like the highest budget, kind of the most prestige?
Yeah, I mean, he was somehow, after I made these movies, his agent came to me and asked me if I wanted to run his company, and I was like a fanboy. I was like, he was the biggest star in the world.
Yeah.
And I was like 29 or something, and
it's wild.
Yeah, and I said okay without thinking about it, and it was a whole different business model that had caused me some difficulty. It was a big studio. He was a big star.
Yeah. They
wanted me to find big franchise movies for him. It was quite entirely different than I was.
Right. Everything was scaled up hugely.
Yeah. In retrospect, I'm not sure if that was the right decision for me, but he was such a huge movie star, I just couldn't.
Yeah.
It was hard to say no.
Well, you said you'd started your movie production by just like heading up and creating this company, and things were on a smaller budget, and then you jumped to this huge aspect of it where the wheel is like already in motion, everybody knows him, the people coming to you are going to be at a certain echelon, and so maybe some people would want that kind of working environment, and maybe you just find out that wasn't actually your ideal.
No, it was. But you're very astute in your analysis of something. I did keep going bigger. So I went from A&M, which is smaller movies. Now I'm going to big franchise movies, and I think I hit a wall.
Yeah.
And I did it for 3 years, and then Norman Lear called me, who I always admired, and he made, you know, some of the greatest television ever, The Jeffersons and All in the Family, and I was a big fan of his, and he was starting a production company, and then I moved over there, and that's where Fried Green Tomatoes came from. So it was kind of a journey.
Yeah. My one story that I have about Robert Redford is he was in Savannah filming years ago. Maybe it was The Conspirator. And a friend of mine said that she was just walking through a square and like wasn't looking where she was going and ran smack into a man and had her hands up, and she looked up and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry I ran into you." And she looked up and she had her hands up on a man's chest, and she said it was made of muscle. He was like, she looked up and it was Robert Redford, and she walked away just thinking, wow, I accidentally just felt on Robert Redford's chest, and incredible.
That's a good story.
One moment.
I can't beat that story.
You never accidentally felt on Robert Redford?
No, and you know, I'll call him and apologize after this interview. But I did, you know, probably the weirdest interview I ever had, and this is a chapter in the book I called The Candidate, was when I interviewed with Redford for the job. First of all, it was just like one of his movies. To meet with him at his house, I was only given instructions to go to this payphone in Malibu and then call him from the payphone, and then he gave me directions to his house.
Goodness.
And I never quite understood that to this day. And then we met, and then he said, "Can you meet me at Sundance?" later, because he was working on a movie. And so I go up to Sundance, and I'm a terrible driver with no sense of direction, and I got lost. And this is before GPS.
Yeah.
And most of my movies were before computers, by the way, and cell phones. So that's a whole other interview. And I'm driving up this mountain, and then I start going down the mountain, and I have no idea where I am. And I'm calling like his office, and nobody's answering. And finally, I get down to the bottom, and they all come out to me, and they say, "Why did you just drive down the ski slope?" I said, "I don't know." They kind of said, "You look like an idiot." So then Redford shows up and takes me to the stables and brings out 2 horses and says, "Let's go for a ride." This is my job interview.
Okay.
And I'm wearing like khaki pants and a yuppie blue blazer and a button-down shirt.
And do you have any experience riding a horse?
When I was 5.
Okay.
You know, in the book there's a picture of me when I'm 5 riding a horse, and Redford riding a horse with his shirt off, getting back to your chest story. And he takes me riding up into the mountains, and we're walking, and he's talking about movies, and I'm talking about movies. And then we go faster and faster, and pretty soon, like, I'm hitting brush with my pants, and my pants get ripped, and I'm sort of bleeding, and my face is all flushed, and then he's going faster and talking, and then we get down, and everybody in the office comes out. I look like a mess, and he looks at me and he laughs at me and he says, "Congratulations, kid, you got the job."
It was just a test to see whether you could stay on the horse and survive.
It was kind of old school macho.
God.
What's this yuppie guy? Can he like take it? So
I wonder how many people he interviewed before you who are just dead out in the brushes. He didn't make it. That's wild. How long did you work there for his company?
3 years.
3 years. Okay. Did you end up going to Sundance?
All the time.
Okay.
Yeah. And he was, at the time I was there, Sundance wasn't doing very well, and he's put his own money into it, and everybody thought he should get out of it.
Really?
And especially his agent thought he should get out of it because they wanted him to just work because he made $5 million a movie.
But he had a vision. He stuck with it.
He really, at that time, I think it's kind of different now, he really wanted to support independent filmmaking. And that's one reason why I went to work for him.
Okay.
Because I thought I'd be doing that.
Yeah, you still had that streak.
But I ended up more on the big studio side because
okay.
the pressure is always from the money. And he was a money machine. If he worked, he made $5 million. People got 10%, 5%. His movies never lost any money. So there was pressure for me to make. I wanted to make independent films, and he wanted to make, and everybody wanted him to star in franchise movies. And so there was a weird kind of tension.
Yeah, for sure.
He was a very smart guy. I liked him.
So he himself wanted to champion indie movies, but you still have this pressure. So you would have to find an indie movie that was capable of making a huge amount of money, which is
I made a movie called Promised Land with Kiefer Sutherland and Meg Ryan, which was one of their first movies, and that was with Michael Hoffman, who I was talking about before, who made The Last Station, and that was a little movie that Redford found in Sundance and developed in the Sundance lab. And it's really a good movie, and you should check it out.
I will check that out.
And it's probably one of Meg Ryan's best performances.
Really?
And she was very young and crazy.
I will check that out, and I love Kiefer Sutherland. So.
Yeah, he's very...
Can we come up to, so you moved to Savannah, you're a professor in the film and TV department since 2004, since your 20-year anniversary. Is that what brought you to Savannah?
I was invited to guest lecture for 9 months.
Oh.
Which is sort of a teacher's year at SCAD, by somebody who isn't here anymore. And my kids had just gone off to school, and I was an empty nester, and I was kind of burnt out. And I said, sure, I'll come down.
Yeah. And you've been living in California this whole time?
I lived in LA the whole time.
Okay.
Working in Hollywood.
I can see why you'd want a change from that.
And, I came down, it was entirely different. I mean, I made fried green tomatoes outside of Atlanta. Yeah. But I didn't really know Georgia or Savannah or anything. And it was I had already been teaching. I was teaching at the graduate school at USC, teaching screenwriting. So it wasn't like I'd never taught before. Yeah. So at least I had some skill, but I really liked I was very surprised at how much I liked Savannah. Yeah. And I've stayed for 20 years. That was a
great era to arrive here because it was a little touristy, but not hugely, and it wasn't super developed downtown, and people still lived in the downtown and the Victorian district. So
I think if you look at Savannah now and you look at it in 2004, it's two different cities. Yeah. And the big difference, people say it's SCAD. I think it's the international students. In a very good way. Yeah. They have changed the city. They've opened up the city's minds. If you go into Kroger's or something, they have huge international sections. Yeah. What's that store? Alda's.
Alda's just opened. There's a huge Asian mart that just opened. Is it H-Town? Something like that.
I think it's made Savannah much more global. Yeah. And people say, "Oh, SCAD's so big." Well, SCAD has done a very good job bringing international students here, and international students are changing the nature of what Savannah is in a way that I think is very exciting.
I once read a statistic a few years ago that of the graduate students in Savannah, that the majority, it was like 60 or 70% of them were international, which was incredible.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah. And I just love teaching international students because they teach me more than I teach them. Yeah. And I've traveled all over the world for SCAD, and I've gone down to Medellin, Colombia, and talked for a week with a woman who was a student, a grad student, and then she arranged for me to teach her where she went to school. And I've done that in Rio and in just about most of South America, and it's great. I've seen the world.
I was going to ask you, when you had that year when you were 26 where you took the sabbatical and flew around the world, I didn't know, are you good at languages in general? Is that...
Terrible.
Okay.
Terrible.
Could there ever be an opportunity at SCAD where you teach a class where you guys all travel somewhere and you make a movie really quickly all together?
Well, I think Lacoste does that.
Okay.
They make a movie in Lacoste.
They do.
And go there. And now they're going to the Cannes Film Festival.
Oh. Good for them.
Doing stuff like that.
Have you gone to Lacoste ever?
No.
It's beautiful. I would love to go as well. Maybe we can both go someday.
Have you gone there? Or?
I have not. I didn't go when I was a student, but I'll apply for the alumni program there.
There's an alumni program.
There's an alumni atelier program where you go for the duration of a quarter.
Right. That's what Izzy was.
Yeah, I think she was in Atlanta for it. You can go to Atlanta as well, which
isn't low cost.
It's not. That's correct. It is not. I did want to ask. So across the street from where we are at the SCAD library, there's Leopold's, the ice cream shop, with another famous movie producer, Stratton Leopold. Is that weird that there's two famous Hollywood movie producers in Savannah? How does that happen? And did you guys already know each other? I have questions.
I didn't know him. I know him now. He's a terrific guy.
It just seems weird to have two in one small city.
It's not that small anymore. And look, with the backlot being built, there's a lot of...
Yeah, that's incredible.
There's a lot of high-profile people. I mean, the Savannah Film Festival is one of the most important events in Savannah now, every year. So he was also more of the studio world than I was. I mean, with Redford, I became it. But he made a lot of big franchise movies. Mission Impossible was his.
Yeah. Well, see, you kind of overlapped. I know he had a lot in the 80s and 90s too, so you overlapped eras. It's interesting.
But I never knew him in Hollywood.
Yeah,
I just knew him down here,
Do you, when the SCAD Film Fest happens here, do you have any special roles that you do? Like, do you interview people or meet with them and show them around?
I host people.
Yeah.
I take them around, and I'm not a big part of the festival. There's plenty of people who do that.
And you said, and you're teaching for SCAD, you do your classes here in the library?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. What are the classes that you teach?
I teach screenwriting and producing, and I supervise a lot of thesis films and adaptation. I figured out once I've taught 14 different classes. So
and
a lot of screenwriting classes.
And the adapted screenwriting class you said you developed yourself?
I created that. I created a distribution class too, which is taught here now.
Oh.
Because I thought, we were making a lot of films, but we weren't teaching students how to just market them. And so I created a class for that. So I've created some new classes too.
That's almost like an adapted screenwriting, the fact that you adapted the screenwriting class into what it is, the offshoot. Yeah. It's kind of meta.
I never thought of myself as meta, but I'll take your word for it.
So your new book has just come out this year, right? Walking in the Fast Lane, bringing us up to date, all your fun stories. The cover of the book, so far it's an ebook. People can look at it on Amazon. The cover is very cool. It's like a surrealist nighttime highway scene.
I actually had never worked in AI before, and I talked into the computer and created that.
Wow, okay.
It's the first time, and I really liked it.
I love the cover. So at some point, hopefully we'll put it out there. Maybe it'll be a printed out book.
It'll be in print in January next month. I'm doing that now. So it's an ebook now on Amazon, and then it'll be in print. It'll be a paperback.
I will post links to that. How did the writing go for this? When did you start writing?
I started writing this book in 1976.
Wow, okay. Like literally you were jotting things down?
When I announced that I was going around the world, I felt I would be a total slacker if I didn't give some purpose to it. So I said, I'm going to write a book.
That's usually what people take a sabbatical for, right?
Right. So I got a Smith Corona typewriter and a case, and I carried it with me around the world, and I brought carbon paper. Do you know what carbon paper is?
I do.
Okay. Well, everybody can Google that.
Maybe I'll include a photo
after
of a
VHS.
piece of carbon paper with this.
And instead of writing a diary, I decided I would write letters to my friends and keep copies.
Oh.
And I have those copies today. They're in the book and they're in the documentary that I made. And so I started writing the book that I've just finished during that trip in 1976, I think. And then last spring, I decided to finish the book. And I spent last summer, sometimes my wife calls it hyper-focused. I gave myself a deadline Labor Day. Mm-hmm. I had only sort of the ramblings of what I started. But this whole mentoring idea kind of crystallized for me, and I sort of understood the pathway of my life much more. And also because, to what I said earlier, so many things I've experienced that if I don't talk about them, nobody will know about them. Good and bad, successes and failures.
Being an archivist of an era.
So I said I'm going to spend the summer and write this book and finish it. And I came here in the Gen Library, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
My wife said it's the most boring summer we've ever had. I didn't go anywhere, we didn't do anything, and I finished the book Labor Day.
You had your little pile of carbon copies of letters you had written.
I did. I went through all that. But, fortunately, a terrific director named Kate Haley, who's a Fulbright scholar who just graduated, directed this documentary about me. And she and her team did a whole lot of the research. So when I sat down, I didn't have to spend the summer researching, finding all. She had done all that and made the movie, which was shown at the Trustees Theater last spring. So I just sat down and wrote my story. And I got a lot of stories. So, and I felt it was time to tell them.
Yeah. Well, also it's your 20-year anniversary being a professor here, which is a nice round number.
Turning 75 is a round number.
My dad, when he turned 75, he could not stop saying, "I am 3/4 of a century old." He liked phrasing it like that.
I'll have to think about that. I'm not sure.
I think in a pain, he kept saying it. I don't know that he liked it. It was like a painful.
Well, you always look at people older than you for inspiration. So now I'm looking at people who are 90 saying, "Oh, well, they're doing great, so I'll be fine."
Thank you. So I'll include a link to this book that's on Amazon, and we'll look forward to it being printed.
Mm-hmm.
How did you arrive at? How was the process of getting it printed?
I'm in the middle of it right now.
Okay. Any tips or surprises you've come across?
I'll have to do another interview because
to wrap it up.
I may have some stories, but I'm literally the next couple of weeks there's a couple of companies I'm going to use to edit it. But the book's already an ebook, so it's not like I'm starting with just a Word document or something.
I think it's funny that you said this documentary had come out and they had done all this research. So it's just funny because it's about you. But like that you would have had to done research on your own life, but somebody else had already done that. And so it's sort of like these different, like this ping pong ball bouncing back and forth of other people doing and then you doing and then somebody else documenting.
Well, they were great. I mean, they went through my high school yearbooks and I had all kinds of stuff that I kept and they picked out what they had their own narrative to tell with me.
Yes.
But I would have had to go through all my yearbooks to sort of figure out, talk about people, and so they did all that. They were great.
So you talked earlier about at the end of a documentary, you think people should have like a call to action. Was there kind of a final thought that they did in this documentary about you?
Well, it's a call to action if you're watching something really depressing.
Yeah.
My story wasn't depressing.
Is there a call to action to people for thinking outside the box and coming up with a whole new company? The way you do?
That's a good question. I say to everybody, keep moving forward. No matter what goes on.
Yeah.
It's the best advice just keep moving forward.
Yeah, you've had your whole life as all these different creative aspects that you're bouncing back and forth and kind of getting bigger and then making a transition over to living in Savannah. And I know that becoming a professor is interesting where it forces you to like look at all these things that you've just been doing at your job and synthesize them and like write it down and impart the knowledge is a whole different way.
Well, I love teaching, and what I live for, and I call it the aha moment, is when a student comes to me all frustrated, they can't figure something out, and I say, "Well, have you tried it that way?" And they go, "Oh, yeah, hey, thanks," and they run off and they're happy, and they're not grinding their teeth anymore for 3 days. So that's. You can't put a price on that,
Yeah, it's true. I remember I majored in illustration, and toward the end of the program, one of the professors said to us, it's something that you maybe take for granted now, but the fact that you all are in class working and you're around other people and you can bounce your ideas off people, she was like, that's a thing once you graduate and you're working alone that you're really going to miss is just having another brain and another set of eyes to look at it. And it took a while for that to kick in, for me to feel that, and it did definitely hit me that it's such a different, weird atmosphere to just work alone as opposed to in, a co-studio with other people around. And now I'm in a studio at City Market, so there's other people around. But Yeah, it is interesting being in any kind of creative field where I guess either writing or painting, where usually you're by yourself, but you do periodically need somebody else to tag in on your project and look at it.
Yeah, I never have understood why students are so reluctant to collaborate, because it's so helpful.
Yeah.
You know, it's much easier than sitting in your room and working something out.
Well, I guess maybe people want the satisfaction of knowing that they did the entire thing themselves, right?
I hope not.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in a sort of collective community, and so even you as an illustrator, your inspiration comes from what you see around you and people you talk to and meet, right? So,
yeah. I always think my best advice if people are stuck creatively is just to like go outside and take a walk, and it's such a simple thing, but I guess I just feel like getting out of whatever tiny thing you're looking at in front of you and just having the sights and the sounds and looking out at the grass and the trees, that somehow in your brain subconsciously knocks some things loose.
Yeah, I recommend putting down your phone, your computer. Well, I don't even carry my phone around with me most of the time, you know. And the need to be on your phone and computer it's not a creative need. And it can really lock you into, you know, I was talking to a student who's a good writer, and what you want to do is not imitate something else. And she was telling me she's graduated now and she's out selling scripts, and she said to me the words I never want to hear: what they're looking for, which means she was trying to write to what they were thinking they were want to buy. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, a movie comes out like Get Out, and they want a big horror movie about. Studios never know what they want, and so if you're asking a studio, what do you guys want now, and you're writing to that, you're way behind. You have to write your own thing without paying attention to what the studios want, or else you're just imitating art and you're not creating art.
That's really good advice. This has been really fascinating. So I'll post links to your book and to you and your Instagram, and people can read all your history. Are there any kind of final words you want to say about Savannah or direction you're going in or anything like that?
Well, I just think we're in an exciting time in Savannah. And, when I first got here, I thought it was a small town because I come from first New York, then LA. Now, and probably because I'm a lot older and my driving's a lot worse, I really enjoy the energy in Savannah and the fact that everything is manageable. Mm-hmm. You know, you may have 4 things to do, but you can do them all in an hour and a half. Yeah. And I think I would encourage everybody to get more and more involved with the energy of the international students. I think they're a joy to have here.
I love that. Can I tell you, I've had this idea. I don't have any money to make it a thing, but so I lived in New York for a number of years too, and my friends and I really liked going to Koreatown and going to the private room karaoke places. Mm-hmm. Where you go in and it's this hallway of little rooms, and you book them depending on your party size, and you just have a private karaoke experience. And karaoke is so big in Savannah. There's a number of like big public karaoke bars, but for people who are more introverted like me, and for international students, like I imagine them coming here, the people who are from Korea or Japan and are used to this private room karaoke experience. I've always felt like downtown there should be one of those here, and that it would do really well. I've been saying this to people for years, but I don't have any money to make this happen. But that's
a good idea.
That's my idea that I've always had. That it's funny that you mentioned the international students, because I've always thought this. So I'm putting it out there.
Where are the public karaoke bars?
Well, the Rail does karaoke, McDonough's.
McDonough's, yeah,
yes.
I know that.
There's another 80s bar, totally awesome. Yeah, so there's a number of places that, like, on different nights, like there's 3 or 4 places that different nights of the week do public karaoke. But no option for private things for people who are a little shyer. Oh, there's also Bay Street Blues is another karaoke place. There's a bunch. Savannahans do like karaoke.
They have them a lot in China too.
Yeah.
I was just reading about that.
Yeah, I mean, and so there's so many international students, and so many of the international students are from Asian countries. So this has always been my vision.
It's a good idea.
Is a private room karaoke house for Savannah.
And now you're on record for having thought.
It is on record,
so
yeah.
I can't
or maybe you can produce it.
Okay.
We'll see. We'll see how this goes. favorites.
Well, thank you for doing this. It's awfully kind of you. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. This has been really fascinating, and I'm so excited to have met you. And yeah, we have a friend in common, Izzy, my friend Izzy, who was one of Andrew's film students years ago.
Favorite film students.
I love that. Incredible. Izzy Titburids, who now works for SCAD as well.
We're all connected.
What a web. Well, thank you, Andrew Meyer. Thank you for being here. And this has been Tamara Garvey with Arts on the Air.